子が待っておりますので、まず私は手短に行く責任があるので手短に行きたいと思います。Remoteness and Communicational Radios in Electroacoustic Music というタイトルなんですけれども、ほとんど言うことがスライドの方に出てまいりますので、ちょっと英語で言うんですけれども、ほとんど出てくるということで、このようなお話していきたいと思います。This presentation is preliminary thinking concerning the concept of remoteness in electroacoustic music, especially in Japanese pieces and concepts. The discussion about remoteness should have a cross relation with the early literature concerning the notion of space, like Kurt Blagoff and François Weil. I'd like to begin the general idea of remoteness, which is defined in English dictionary, and to briefly refers to the use of the term in the text of Pierre Schaeffer. The term remoteness, or being remote, indicates the situation of being moved to the place far away. I dare to say remoteness, not the word distance nor separation, because the word remoteness has stronger connection with motion than those words. Etymologically, remoteness is to be moved to the distant place, while the word distance can indicate some scale of the space, and separation is a situation already far away. Including the nuance of motion, remoteness has stronger meaning, indicating that someone intentionally divides one thing from the other. At this stage, remoteness is more suitable than the other similar words. The reason is firstly because it can be usually used in an idiomatic connection like remote control, which can be a fundamental word for today's electroacoustic music. Physically, remote control goes together with the electronic sensing in the interactive mixed music. Psychologically, remotely controlled or controlled to the remote sounds are often the important representing elements in electroacoustic sounds, or more fundamentally in acousmatic music. Furthermore, for the telematic network music, we are in the remote places in the points of time and space. A person or a machine in one place controls the system or the person in a remote place. The second reason is that the word remote has no direct translation in French. For example, remote control is normally said in French, télécommande. Remote from society is à l'écart de la société. In the remotest corner of Asia is au fond de l'Asie, etc. Pierre Schaeffer used sometimes isolé for the word emphasizing the sounds separated in way of recording from the context of generation. Quotation. The French quotation, but I say in English. As the signification predominates and the people play based on it, that is a literature and not the music. But how is it possible to forget the signification, to isolate the sounding phenomenon itself? Isolement, in French isolement, is the first step for the early concrete music. The composer gets the first remoteness from the social context of making sounds. After arrangement, design, and some manipulations, the sounds are placed in the real space as an artificially constructed electronic sound field. This process of placement I will refer in the following chapter, but here I make emphasis on the point that psychological remoteness refers not only to isolement or l'écart in French style acousmatic music, but also new situations offered to the composers by some newly born technological areas, that is, sensing, mapping, high-speed audio-visual transmission, and so on. In electroacoustic music, what is remote from what? Schaeffer's formation and montage by Takemitsu. I think several levels of remoteness can be picked up. In the concrete and some acousmatic music, the most primitive and the most fundamental remoteness occurs in the stage of recording. As Schaeffer said in his earliest experiments, microphone separates the sounds from the space and the context where the sounds are generated. By recording the sounds, Schaeffer found a difference between attack and sustain. Quotation. By having one of the bells hit, I got the sound after the attack. Without its percussion, the bell becomes an oboe sound. After recording and listening to the recorded sounds, the concrete composition as solfege starts. In order to bring out remoteness, which could be distinguished from space concept, here I point out 25 fundamental terms described by Pierre Schaeffer in his Esquisse d'un solfège concret. The taxonomy refers to the process from recording to musical formalization. Schaeffer described the process of creation from hearing to time design should be traced from monophony, group, serial note complex, gross note, and structure. This process is not to combine the context each sound was produced, but to redesign the sounding process by separating each sound from the context, which resembles musical motif develops in some different harmonic contexts in classical music. Construction, that is, to classify the sounds materials and make a formation from monophony to structure by way of transmutation, transformation, modulation, and execution, montage, mixage. The sounds which originated from the context of space where the sounds are generated now come to another space, that is, a diffusion space. Schaeffer's mature technique of music concrete from one space to another space was explained with the terms both material and music like this. In Schaeffer's Esquisse d'un solfège music concrete, that is, material classification, sample fragment element, musical classification, and types of manipulation. In this process of four-stage manipulation, that is, the formation process from execution, montage, mixage, and spatialization, the remoteness could be found at two levels, materials and structural elements as music. If the first level of remoteness does not elastically change the low sounds, for example, we composers and audience can recognize the indication of the raw materials. In this case, the remoteness is the quality of the original sound. That is, remoteness of the original sounds. In case that the formalization is too highly abstracted and structured to be recognized as the original sounds, it is not the indication of the original sound which effect on the auditory impression. In this case, the discussion of remoteness should be kept in structuralization in itself, in montage, mixage, and spatialization. As an example of the remoteness in montage, I'd like to talk of Toru Takemitsu's large-scale piece of tape montage, Years of Ear, What is Music? Years of Ear, What is Music? By Takemitsu was presented in the World Exhibition in Osaka 1970, twice a day with 1,008 loudspeakers which were set both on the wall and under the seats and the ceilings. In the beginning of the piece, we can hear the noises of ordinary life, such as street noise, subway noise, and jet airplane, etc. Takemitsu was very strict to search for the preferable noises, so the engineers repeated several times to record the various noises. Years of Ear, What is Music is a kind of interview collections. The question is, what is music? Takemitsu interviewed 24 persons: John Cage, Marius Constant, Mikako Carl, Toshi Ichiyanagi, Teizo Matsumura, and so on. This montage also holds global diversity of sounds, including the throat float of Eskimo, Polynesian cries, and ballads of Syria, solo nei, etc. Another element in this montage are the word silence be said in a small voice in Japanese, English, French, German, Italian, Russian, Indian, Israel, which are followed by the music of each country. The answers to the interview were too much scattered in various kinds of languages to be understood as sentences. In the sketch of the piece, Takemitsu explains. The composer's answers to the question, what is music, are to be often inserted in the process of the piece. It is very important to edit with acoustic ideas with or without the simultaneous translation. Takemitsu thinks simultaneous translation is an acoustic effect. The two different languages occur simultaneously and the two were remote. It is just like the situation where four directions of the diffusion, east, west, north, south, are set for each manic component. Takemitsu himself in Shinjuku, Oskunst in speaking in English, Abraham Morse in speaking in French. In this piece, remoteness is set and represented not only as a real space which has four paths east, west, north, south, but also as cultural differences, each of which is in a distance, and the composer himself is in the center. Communication among the different cultures, like that among Japanese, French, German, and Italian, for example, was a typical international relation in 1970. That was Japan versus European countries. But in today's situation, people think about cross-culture between Asian countries and the United States, or Arabian culture versus European tradition. Cultural differences are surely a kind of remoteness, but the phase of the difference is altering from generation to generation. The temporal structure of the piece proceeds with diffusion and convergence of space, and remoteness is found in the sound, voice of interviewed persons, and the language. Space concept in the latter half of 20th century and remoteness in today's situation. In the montage of Takemitsu, we find that recognizing the cultural difference and the montage nostalgic distant past are both psychological phase of remoteness. But aesthetically, that psychological remoteness is not clearly differentiated from psychological distance or space. In this chapter, I would like to consult with Kurt Blakopf and François Bave. Kurt Blakopf wrote in 1971 about the space manipulation in electroacoustic music. Not only reverberation, but manipulation concerning the intensity, timbre, and balance. Blakopf certifies that the electronic music can control the scale of the space and the darkness of the space by way of controlling pitch, intensity, and duration, and he indicates 2 points of experiments for electroacoustic music. One is the research of sound materials, and the other is the acoustic psychology of the various parameters of sound materials. Other than Blakopf, we know several discussions about the space concept in electroacoustic music or the conscience or psychology of space, like Piaget and Joseph Bourret. But we go to François Bale. François Bale wrote in 1998, when sound field and the elastic diffusion has already accomplished a special style of paysage morphogenetic, and composers have got their own space representation as follows. The considered space as morphogenetic landscape is perceived as contours and densities, impacts and volumes, movements and speed. Bale mentioned several parameters for space representation. He said that the more sophisticated elements to represent space were based on three levels of remoteness of hearing. The first is cognition and comprehension of sounds related with the causality. The second is music formation, and the last is the emergence of sense of formation, which makes colors immediately the auditory memory. So the remoteness, which has been separated from the generative context, comes again as memory. Remoteness as itself in telematic situation. Today we have several telecommunication systems. Meanings of telepresence can be described along with the 5 phases of remoteness of musical communication. 1. Remoteness existing in the real space between the audience and the players. Telepresence in the concert place can be perceived as a relation in which the stage players present in a remote place that is on the stage. Practically saying, he, she, they is not the person with whom the audience can communicate directly, or the audience cannot know which sound comes through the network if all the sounds come from the speakers. Second, remoteness to be perceived through timbre. Latency of sounds and visual remoteness are technically indispensable. For composition, remoteness can be replaced by timbre. 3. Remoteness to be perceived through a sound, effect, or rhythm. Different scale of time simultaneously exist because of the latency. If the time differences are to be set up in one place, time should be perceived as sound or rhythm. 4. Remoteness to be intently shown to the audience. The audience should be informed that several remote places are connected through network. And the last, remoteness can be perceived in interactive design with pseudo real-time system. The aesthetic value of live interactive music can be discussed in the point of system, sound, and performance. Interactions in several phases can be compiled in the situation of telematic performance, because the interaction can show clearly the remoteness between the performers. Conclusion. Technical terms are generated mostly based on the system or hardware structure, but most of the terms have had the original signification. Today's terminology in electroacoustic music, as well as in the other digital arts, sometimes includes the vocabulary which has both technical meanings and aesthetical meanings. Remoteness can be used as a fundamental aesthetic term as well as a technical term which indicates a physical and mental situation of being far away. That's all. Thank you. テクニカルタームも美学用語として考えてもいいのではないかという、ちょっとした提案でございました。もしご質問がいただけるようでしたら。
I was wondering, in the case of mixed music where you have the performers on stage and sometimes even electronic performers on stage, where do you locate remoteness? How do you see remoteness in a mixed content situation?
So remoteness in the mixed pieces, so the audience can't know what occurs in the stage. So the system, the audience can understand the systems. So see and hear, the interaction is concealed. So that is a kind of remoteness.
I agree with you.
リモートネスのですね、説明といい価値っていうのはあったんですけども、私は技術やってる立場から見ると、リモートネスは技術をやる側からですね、ディレイもなくして、レテンシーもなくして、そこにいるかのごとく踏まわせるように今技術は進んでるわけですよね。でこの考え方はレテンシーは必然的にあって、それを音楽の要素として考えていこうっていうのは、技術やから見るとあまり面白くない立場で、そのできないことを逆手にとってその価値を見出すっていうのは、テクノロジーを進める側から見るとあまり面白くない視点なんですけど、逆にそういったものがなくなってもみんなリアルタイムで画像も映像も音楽もみんなリアルタイムで近く感じるようなものであれば、それはこの視点から見ると面白くないということなんでしょうか。それだけ質問したい。
面白い面白くないではなくて、ちょっと私も今日のプレゼンってまだ本当にプレゼンになりというか第一歩だなと思って、あまりちょっとうまく言えてないと思うんですけれども、そのネットワークコンサートの場合とその他の場合、それまでの他のものとちょっとどうやって結びつけるかというちょっと離れているような理論だったと思うんですけども、そのできないことはそれはできないならできない、その時のテクノロジーの状況でそのままやるっていうこともそれは別に私は否定しないので、その時のテクノロジーがまだ至ってないのであればそのままで別に我々は表現はできるであろうと。でその時にそのリモートネスってじゃあ何なのって、もちろんその、ネットワークコンサートの時は見えない相手とか遠く離れてる相手って遠隔地のっていうことなんですけれども、でそれはだからその技術的なハードルが、でそれ以外の時のその離れたものを何とかしているっていう感覚というのが、それ以外の時にもあるんじゃないかっていう、そこで結びつくんじゃないかというのは今日の話だったので、技術がどうだっていう話は全く今日はなかったという感じです。すいません。じゃあ次に行きたいと思います。どうもありがとうございました。で、next